Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi. After a while, I've got with me Vice Admiral Anup Singh, who's going to try and help us make some sense of what's happening in the oceans. After a long time, I think the world is beginning to reckon that land battles are land battles, but when the oceans get choked, the entire world comes to a standstill. So, sir, thank you so much. Namaskar, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adi. Always a pleasure.
So, sir, as I said, I think this is the first time in recent history that people are realizing that how important sea lines of communications are. Just an opening comment on that.
Absolutely. In all my lectures on training within and outside the Navy, um, during service and um, after superannuation, I've been saying that a man happens to be primarily a continental creature and therefore little realizes the bottoms of the seas because feet are firmly grounded on terra firma. Other than some 0.1 or 0.2% of humanity which goes on the mercantile marine and assists the global economy. I always have said that between 35 and 40% of global economy and even economies of landlocked nations like Austria and Switzerland is entirely dependent on the sea. And for those countries which are dependent on energy resources from other countries, the sea becomes much more important than anything else. Look at China, look at India, look at Japan, which doesn't have a drop of oil or a cc of gas. So people have started realizing now only because of episodes like the 1988 Iran-Iraq war, when tanker warfare started, followed by piracy incidents. And that's another point that what is happening right now um, is is a redo of what happened during the piracy incidents between 2005, particularly between 2008 and 2012 in the Gulf of Aden. And the World Bank as well as UNIDO came out with figures close to $18 billion as penalties on trade uh, that traverse the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And imagine 30% of container shipments of the world and 12% of all global trade generally passes through the Red Sea. So, more importantly, when piracy incidents came to a peak in between 2008 and 10, Lloyd's reported ninefold increase in insurance rates. Many shipping crews from American presidential lines down to the lowest rung in shipping companies refused to come on board. They didn't mind losing their salaries if the ship were to cross between Suez Canal and Bab el Mandab. And a similar thing has started happening now. And that's why the Americans have started that Operation Guardian Prosperity. So um, you one needs to understand that the sea assists the global economic sustenance, and there is no alternative because volumes and weights the way they can be. It's a matter of economies of scale. Volumes and weights in any case that are transported as cargo by ships cannot be transported by rail, road, or air.
So, sir, starting from the Red Sea, I mean, we see that the Houthis, a small so-called terrorist group, or whatever you may want to term them as, they're
Yes.
not a very well organized force. They've
Yes.
been able to literally choke off the world trade, uh, and there is no kind of fixing to that. But the question a lot of people are asking today is that, is this a counter to the Malacca dilemma that the Chinese have? Because a lot of people claim and force, even I believe that somehow, is that the Chinese have been kind of supplying a lot of things to Iran, who has been supplying it to Houthis, and who kind of creates this entire nonsense in that region. So have the Chinese kind of tried to give a taste of what uh, a choke point can feel like?
I don't think that may have been the aim of the Chinese, because they have been really scared after the after Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and that's when they really started taking measures to improve the strength of their navy. And they pulled in a lot of resources, diverted away from the army and the air force and the strategic forces, because they suddenly realized they had neglected the navy other than the submarine force, and that to the nuclear submarine force. Uh, from the time that the Soviets and the Chinese broke off their relationship. And they felt, in fact, Mao was famously known to have said that we don't need a navy, really. I mean, words to that effect. He said that land commands the sea, whereas facts historically and today are the other way around. Those who control the sea have no fear of anything to do with economy and anything to do with strategic power. So this is something that the Chinese have been very wary of, choking up and training people other than their own maritime militia in the business of asymmetric warfare. And we people have been saying since the dawn of this millennium that asymmetric warfare is here to stay, and therefore future wars need to be tackled in an entirely different focus on planning as well as on army, which means that you need to be prepared for those elements of asymmetric warfare where, first of all, uh, denial by actors, whether state or non state, is the easiest way to get away. And secondly, asymmetric warfare being much, much cheaper an option has been adopted by many countries, including Pakistan. You imagine a drone is no more than 20 or $30,000. In fact, cheaper drones with lesser endurance, but almost similar payload capacity, up to 400 kilograms of explosives can be carried by remotely controlled drones. And today's range endurance varies between uh, 200 to 800 nautical miles, not kilometers. Multiplied by 1.85 is kilometers. So imagine what kind of a scenario, strategic scenario has the world fallen into. Not the Arabian Sea, not the Indian Ocean, the entire world. Because the Indian Ocean, despite being the smallest water body out of the three main oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Indian Ocean, is the most critical. Because anyone who has to traverse between the Atlantic and the Pacific has no alternative but to go through the Indian Ocean unless they want to spend a lot more money in terms of fuel and time. Time for shippies is money, as many of them today are going to around the Cape of Good Hope to avoid Houthi attacks. Can you imagine 20 days extra voyage? And for a large ship, for a super Panamax, commodity or goods carrier, it could mean anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000 worth of extra fuel and crew salaries and insurance premiums and charter rates. That's what is happening since the 17th of October. There are so many shipping companies who do not want to risk uh, the Houthi attacks on their on their cargo and particularly on their crew. So it's becoming a very sad state of affairs, because something that we had all the time since the late 80s, in fact, particularly at the dawn of the millennium since 2000, warned ourselves and warned the rest of the world in strategic dialogues that the future of warfare is going to be entirely different, no more traditional. There is, for a country that is a lesser have and does not follow principles, basic principles of nationhood, will find it very easy to do proxy and asymmetric warfare. So you imagine the Americans, and for that matter, our destroyers, are going to be using $2 million a piece missiles or $7 million a piece missile to shoot down a $20,000, $30,000 drone. That's the cost that those who are mature as nations and those who are suffering the onslaught of asymmetric warfare from very, very immature entities or immature nations will have to pay. You can see the amount of missiles that have been, the amount of missilery that has, and other ordnance that has been used up by American carriers and strike group components, elements like frigates and destroyers from the US Navy that was stationed in the Mediterranean post 7th October when Hamas carried out that attack. The amount of ordnance that they have disposed of, that they have used, that's all money. Plus, it stresses and stretches uh, to very thin margins the entire force, and it adds to not only crew fatigue, it adds to platform fatigue. That means you have to replace people on station very frequently. So it's not a very happy state of affairs. And all this is going to mean a very, very serious negative bias on global economy, because the global economy, as I just said, depends on the seas.
So you mentioned the Indian Navy, and I think let me just say this: the previous answer that you've given is quite profound because it kind of scares the living daylight out of any country that's wanting to grow like us today. So it's quite a dangerous sort of a game. Uh,
Mm.
this prosperity garden on this American flagged operation that they're doing, we've not been a part of it. There was no official communication that they asked us or anything like that. But we've deployed on our own and in number, 10 warships plus innumerable other assets, which of course are not going to be told and they must remain like that. Uh, the question is, we know this area. We've been patrolling this area since 2008, post the establishment of Bab al Mandab, the Al Dukum port in Oman. We've
Yes.
been able to push back on a lot of piracy, as a matter of fact. Uh, we've got this area safe from pirates. Literally, it was the Indian Navy that did most of the heavy lifting. Uh, what does this showcase with regards to the one capability of the Navy and two future importance of the Navy, and what should we kind of look at?
Yes, Adi, first let me tackle the preamble in your question about, the Indian Navy is not part of, I think what you meant was the CMF, correct? Coalition Maritime Forces,
No,
combined
no, no. So
maritime forces.
the American Operation Prosperity Garden, which is currently in the Red Sea area, we are not part of that. We are
Yes,
deployed separately.
we are
We are
not
doing our
part of
own
that.
thing.
We are not part of that for a very good reason. And I'll take you back to 2003 when, under George Bush Jr., um, when when the Americans went for the second time into Iraq, there was a very senior level delegation that visited us. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the prime minister, and thank God for that. That this delegation sought a meeting first with the defense minister and then with others, and the cabinet went into consultation. And we people, I was in naval headquarters, and I remember we were keeping our fingers crossed that we do not accept this proposal of the Americans to say join the coalition of forces in our fight against weapons of mass destruction and nations that are not, that are part of the axis of whatever. I don't want to name that term. And sure enough, um, before the before the sun was down, a very crisp and clear message came out of the government. All thanks to the Prime Minister of the time, that we will not join any coalition of this nature. I remember we were I was early morning that day. I was on the golf course with some senior people, and when this question was put that today we are in all probability going to join the coalition because you can't say no to the powers that had come down visiting us. And I stopped in my tracks and said, yes, if you want bomb blasts in Palika and elsewhere, then surely we can join. And thank God we did not join. Because that way, I must say, historically, we've been a very mature nation. And we know uh, where to participate and where not to participate, where not to put your hand in the till unnecessarily. Similarly, in Operation Prosperity Guardian, uh, the US and British forces are now bombarding Houthi settlements or whatever in Yemen, etc. India has not been known to do this kind of a thing, certainly not in third nations. And what for? Where there is an attack and there is certain evidence, there I think we should, as we have done in the recent past, carry out surgical strikes, take out elements which are not right, but not in a nation with whom we do not have enmity. You cannot interfere with the laid down principles under the UN Charter, because that is what makes a difference between mature and other nations. But insofar as these attacks by the US and British forces are concerned, I am not saying that the Americans are wrong. After all, US forces stationed in the Mediterranean have been attacked in October sought to be attacked or intended to be attacked by Houthi rebels, and therefore they had all the reason to carry out whatever bombardment. We cannot be going as part of OPG and carrying out attacks in a third country as part of a coalition. Therefore, insofar as that part is concerned, we are still dependent on the Navy to put its best foot forward and carry out patrols in the Red Sea, in the Persian Gulf, and in the Central Indian Ocean, as we've been doing since 2017, as we've been doing in under mission-based deployments, as we've been doing since 2008 in anti-piracy missions. We have still not removed that ship. One ship is on station in the international transit route, um, stretching from Socotra, off Socotra, right up to Djibouti, some 540 nautical miles.
See the a lot of people are saying, oh, it's beyond our paradigm and this and that. But one thing people fail to understand is that post the two incidents of Indian bound ships, I won't say Indian ships because they were not,
Yes.
that were attacked, there's been nothing else after that. So,
Well,
you know,
that doesn't mean more attacks will not come. It would be
absolutely. But we are
foolhardy on our
doing,
part to
yeah,
it would be foolhardy on our part to withdraw.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and at the moment, I can say with some confidence that even though I'm not in uniform, nor do I have, nor do I intend to gain access to any information which is supposed to be classified. But I think the scenario is very clear. Uh, the right kind of visits are taking place. Political and diplomatic efforts are in the right line at the moment. Yet, whether state or non-state actors, these drone attacks are not going to end very soon.
Absolutely.
It's,
Absolutely.
we saw it during the episodes of piracy between 2005 and 2012. By the way, the that organization deals with the UN organization IMO, which deals with the business of uh, classifying what are where all incidents of piracy or armed robbery have taken place in the world, in the oceans. It has lifted the high risk area just ironically just on the 1st of January from where it was close to the Indian coast. And you see now what has happened is as good or as bad as piracy attacks, including the attack on what is that vessel, Lily Norfolk or Sai Baba, I think Lily Norfolk, where a piracy
Mm.
attack. So those guys are back. And we've been saying it for ages that choke points are very bad for safe navigation because of constrictions, geographic constrictions. But more seriously, they provide safe havens to non-state and actors which are sponsored quietly by the state. And particularly in poor nations, the Indian Ocean happens to have 20% of the world's population. And some of the
Mm.
least developed nations and some of the most poor nations, and also a few poorly governed nations of the world. So that these are circumstances that support and encourage practices like piracy, armed robbery, narco terrorism, maritime terrorism, and whatever have you. And it happens only
How
in this part of the world.
how do you kind of categorize the factor that when this issue was beginning, that the Chinese kind of ignored an SOS call, sir, and there is literally nobody calling them out for it, and it's a responsibility of the Chinese Navy or any navy sailing in that area for uh, addressing these calls. They just ignored it and went.
I think the system in the People's Republic of China is strictly communism, and therefore, if it is a Chinese flagged vessel, he will, like in their armed forces, they have the same system as the Soviets used to have. There is a political commissar, but the mercantile marine, they are still under those which are Chinese flagged. They are still under state control, even if the Chinese claim that COSCO is a not a government-owned entity. Of course, it is as good as 100% government-owned entity. The largest flagged, home flagged fleet in the world today is the Chinese mercantile marine, with flying the Chinese flag. They don't fly Liberian, Panamanian, or Bahamian flags for the sake of convenience and for the sake of economy, because they know that what the Soviets did was the right thing during the Cold War. Soviets used to have the largest mercantile fleet because they needed logistic support and they needed communication in those days when digital communications were not yet on the anvil. And they needed logistic support for their ships, and also they needed eyes on the surface of the oceans.
Mm.
So the greatest amount of intelligence used to come from their merchant ships. The Chinese are following the same practice. But being a communist country and being a closed state, I should say, it is in all probability their ships, their masters have instructions that till you get clearance, do not intervene anywhere. So they must be waiting for some kind of a clearance. And then there is a, I mean, these are not practices which are known to exist in the world. By the way, on a different take, when the first incident of piracy took place against a Chinese vessel in August of 2008, it was an Indian naval ship which had just arrived on scene for the first time that rescued that Chinese vessel. And a second attack took place a couple of months. And at that time, the Chinese thanked government of India for having rescued that ship. And the second attack took place a couple of months later. Once again, an Indian Navy ship's helicopter, which had already taken off from its ship in the Gulf of Aden, um, approached that Chinese vessel. And by the time it approached, of course, the pirates had disappeared in their skiffs to the mothership. It is because of these two incidents that the Chinese started positioning three instead of one ship. The only country which positioned three ships together. And till this date, it's called the Anti-Piracy Task Force, Counter-Piracy Task Force. Till this date, they stay there for 3 to 4 months, three ships at a time. They are on patrol because they found a very valid and legitimate reason to show their presence.
So, so that's as for that about the Red Sea. I want to switch to the issue in the South China Sea. You've got the Chinese and the Philippines at it for a long time now. That old World War II
Yes,
scuttle ship which is there. Uh, I find the Philippines also this time are being a bit more aggressive than the last time around in Scarborough Shows in 2012, where they are actually aggressively going forward and doing whatever they want to. Apart from that, they are taking journalists to kind of show the world, ये है आपकी Chinese Navy.
yes,
So, which is a very interesting thing.
that's
How do
right.
you see the so-called fight in that region at the moment, sir?
The world got a very serious, and particularly the Southeast Asian region, and I should say the Far East and
I'll stop you here, sir.
they got a
Volume volume is gone.
I saw
The voice is gone.
volume is gone. Is it?
Yeah, yeah. It's cracking up quite a bit,
Oh,
which it should not, because this time your video is clear, but your voice is cracking up. Previously, the video was not clear and the voice was
very very
perfectly fine.
strange because video takes a lot of. Let me just try on my laptop one more time.
Yeah,
If at
sure.
all the thing, because my son has been working on it actually. Let me just No, Adi, no go, no joy. The camera is still not set properly. It still
All
shows
right.
the back of the laptop.
I think the
Let's
voice
try.
is cleared up. I think all it
Yeah,
needed was a reset. So I think that has happened.
telling, telling the Chinese that we are not using you.
So let's begin, sir. So as
Yeah.
I was saying, the Philippines issue. Let's move away from the Red Sea and talk about Philippines, sir.
Yes.
Because we've got an issue there, and where the Chinese are kind of being getting
Mm,
showed up quite badly, actually, if I may say. The Philippines, unlike
yes.
before, have stood up for their rights. They've brought in journalists to show the
Yes.
world what the Chinese are all about. Uh, but we see the Americans keeping a certain distance in spite of having a heavy presence in Philippines. How do you see the issue, sir?
You know, there have been two setbacks in contemporary history insofar as the Philippines are concerned. After the end of the Cold War, the Filipinos suddenly decided that there is no need for the Americans to be here, and we've been looking at trade and other avenues of making revenue. There is no need to get those $100 million a year because of the Subic Bay Naval Base, one of the largest overseas bases of America, the largest at that time. And the Andrew, whatever the air base, Clark Air Base, or whatever the name was. And therefore, the Americans had to withdraw from there. And then slowly the Filipinos suddenly realized what a blunder they had committed. And they invited the Americans. And the Americans, of course, under Barack Obama, uh, he was the one who very strongly opposed the Chinese and said that what you're doing is totally incorrect and we will show our presence because we are there for A, freedom of navigation, and B, a rules based international law. Now, uh, unfortunately, the world second time faced a terrible um, episode of negativity on the part of Philippines when President Duterte won the elections. Just after the famous arbitral um, judgment came out of the ITLOS, giving 14 out of 15 yes votes for all the points raised in the petition by Philippines, and saying China has no right to do what it has been doing, and there is nothing laid down in UNCLOS or any other international covenant that allows a country to mark a 9 dash or a 100 dash or a 2 dash line on the water. Now, it is in 2014 that for the first time the Filipinos did this. They took foreign journalists on one of their naval vessels to show them, deliberately to show them that as we approach the Sierra Madre, which is the World War II vintage logistic ship, which was deliberately grounded in 1999 by the Filipinos to stake their claim and as part of their sovereignty of the Second Thomas Show. They grounded it because the ship was already dilapidated, and after that, much later, they positioned their Marines when they found that the Chinese were trying to come and disturb whatever was happening on the Second Thomas Shoal and try to take over, just like they did in Scarborough. So that had a very, very good effect on the Chinese, on the world and against the Chinese. Because the moment they saw that foreign journalists were taken, first they protested, but then they suddenly started taking a step back because they realized that the world is seeing firsthand at 200 yards distance, followed by as close as 70 yards from the Filipino ship, that the Chinese Coast Guard cutter heavy one, came close to threaten, physically threaten, and almost carry out a blockade of a reef within the exclusive economic zone of Philippines and deny access to their own waters and to their own vessel called Sierra. It is after that that they've positioned the Marines and they've been doing logistic support. Now, even at that time, the Chinese said that the Philippines were doing something against international law. They were trying to construct a permanent settlement rather than this ship. First, the Chinese had protested, why have you grounded that ship? And at that time, the Philippines government said, no, it was not a deliberate move. Later, they admitted, yes, it was a deliberate move, and rightly so. Because we wanted to position, we don't have the resources to carry out, to construct, nor do we want to, disrupt biodiversity in that area by constructing anything. But once again, this time they were carrying some material and cargo, not only to replenish the Sierra Madre and its marine station on it, but also to perhaps reinforce, because that ship is in very bad shape, being a steel hull. So they can't carry out repairs, and therefore they were carrying some material. And it is quite possible that they were trying to construct something on the reef, just not on the scale the Chinese have done, but to create a permanent station. And the Chinese again shoot those two ships away. This time they were not warships. I think they were civilian ships of the Philippines. But the second, as I was talking about, the second sad incident that took place was the um, taking over by President Rodrigo Duterte. I mean, he demolished all that the world had gained, not just the Philippines at its loss. And he said, no, I want to have harmony with China and we will gain a lot by economic engagement. And I do not believe that all these claims need to be taken to a arbitral tribunal or a court. I think, I'm sorry to say, I'm sorry to use the word, he was being really stupid. And the Filipinos, God knows why they elected him as president, because they knew what his line of thinking, even during his campaigns, was. So that setback is not just of 6 years of his presidency, but that setback is multiplied into almost half a century of degradation of the future, which the current president, Marcos, is trying to correct. And despite being a small nation, small in terms of population, small in terms of relative strength of economy and military might, very small compared to China, I think his actions and his line that he's pursuing in terms of political and diplomatic statements from his government is just right. Absolutely right. Here I must say that for the first time, Indian diplomacy and Indian initiatives in international relations has also been very good. Because when Enrique Manalo, the foreign secretary, who's been there for a long time under Duterte as well as under Marcos right now, when Enrique Manalo visited India in June of last year for that joint commission between the two countries, bilateral commission, it is the first time since 2016 that the Indian Minister of External Affairs made that very strong statement about rules-based international order and words to the effect that every country must comply with UNCLOS and with international laws, and that meaning that the Chinese better comply with the UNCLOS ruling. Till this event, All Indian responses, not only to this episode of 2016, but even previously, were very benign, were generic in nature, which did not help our stand even in Ladakh. You know, so this is the first time, and I think we've done the right thing by extending a hand of friendship to Philippines, which was in need of friends, um, and not only in 23 but even earlier. And we are therefore, as you know, the BrahMos missile was being sought by the Vietnamese, it was being sought by the Indonesians, but the first country we've given it to is Philippines, which came as a very huge surprise to many people, even in India, not only abroad. So these are absolutely right moves by us. And we should actually go out of our way to double down on maritime, bilateral maritime engagement, including more exercises with them, increasing the defense line of credit that we announced 2 years ago or last year, and doing a lot more which is visible to the Chinese and to the rest of the world. Now, on your question of why the Americans are not really up to it, I think what Barack Obama had done up to it till 2016 was received a very serious setback when Donald Trump said that allies have to pay for their defense. And everything is not, there are no free lunches, and America has no responsibility to use its manpower and its resources by stationing people in on land in those countries which are allies of America. That was a very, very serious setback to America and American policy. Now, after that, in President Joe Biden's time, I think there is a little weakness in putting its feet forward. Uh, you know, you can see in Ukraine, unfortunately, there's nothing that the US has done except announcing aid every now and then. A visit to Poland by the president was a very welcome move right in the beginning, but that's about it. So mainly because the current dispensation in America has not really been forthcoming insofar as defending its allies. Of course, statements are being made. Some surveillance aircraft, patrol aircraft like the P-8A, Poseidon, and some ships are still carrying out FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, but not at the level at which they started in 2015 under President Barack Obama. So there has been a little weakness in so far as the US strategy in this area is concerned with allies.
Uh, on that note, sir, I want to ask you.
There may well be a, sorry to interrupt. There may well be
Please.
another reason that you saw the Secretary for Commerce, forget his name, who had visited China recently, followed by Anthony Blinken to China, and they both called on the president in their own turn, where the global press was talking about America is wanting to is wanting to do what the Chinese have been hoping for, mending fences and so on, because there's no point in taking a confrontational stand all the time. However, that should not keep them away from defending allies, and particularly in areas where the American policy has been very clear that a rules-based order is a rules-based order, and you cannot violate the UNCLOS. Sorry.
Not a worry, sir. Sir, so my last question in this aspect would be that the Americans keep telling us that you guys need to do more and this and that and everything. And of course, it's, as you mentioned, would be under the American flag. That's what they want. But this time again, we see the Indian Navy taking a step forward and doing whatever it wants to do by conducting. You mentioned about the weapons, and of course, there was an exercise with the Filipino Navy as well. So that's our own game that we are
That's
playing
right.
there.
That's right.
What are, what is the messaging that we are trying to do, and how does this kind of fit into a joint security structure that the Americans kind of dream of?
You know, once again, Quad had a hiatus of almost a decade between 2007 and 2017. And we were hoping that Quad becomes some kind of a security. It is the quadrilateral security dialogue by its own acronym. But there is very little that the Americans or the Indians or the the Australians in particular ever wanted to define it as a military partnership because everyone seemed to be a little cautious about the Chinese reaction in 2007-8, and particularly after Kevin Rudd withdrew from the Quad. So that 10 years has been a negative bias on the Quad. But after that, once again, in 2017 and last year, there was a lot of effort that was put in by all four nations in not only doing exercises under the banner of Malabar, and all those four countries happened to be there, and that was a great amount of messaging. But once again, there has been a little slackening, which seems to be because perhaps the Australians also, as you know, uh, Prime Minister Albanese has recently visited China. Uh, the Australians are also a little cautious. The US, in any case, has not been very forthcoming in doing too many exercises. But the Indians have, as I said about the BrahMos, after that carried out a number of exercises with the Philippine state. And we never used to have regular exercises with them. Now we are doing it on an almost annual basis. And at least once, if not twice in a year, we send ships to the Pacific. Why don't we uh, join up with the Americans and say, do FONOPS, etc.? That's not our policy at all. We don't do freedom of navigation patrols. But we certainly point out, not only take note, point out anyone who violates anything. Why don't we do exercises only to say that we are for FONOPS or we are for, what is laid down in UNCLOS in the Pacific, because we are not a resident Pacific power. And the messaging that goes by carrying out exercises, whether with the Filipinos or with the Vietnamese in particular, or with the Indonesians, or with the ASEAN, which kicked off last year, is very loud and clear and goes to the right ears. That is the Chinese. So if the Chinese have got their goat, very good for us. We've achieved our aim, and that must remain our aim.
So it's strategic messaging, is what you're saying, and I think that I agree with you, because we don't need to fight other people's battle, but we need to communicate our intentions and our motivations as well as our policies pretty clearly. So amazing, an eye-opener experience. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I always learn a lot, and it keep your conversations are very realistic and to the point. I must congratulate you on that. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I know you've been very busy uh, in your personal life as well. I really appreciate you taking out the time to do this interview, and I'll catch up with you very soon as you kind of get free from whatever you're doing, and to learn a little more from you. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Adi. Always a pleasure. Jai.
Thank you.